Hey everybody, it's Sensei Sid with Fields Karate. Today I want to take a couple minutes and talk to you about culture, and specifically our karate culture. Now, usually when we think of culture, we think of national cultures. We talk about the Japanese culture, or the American culture, or the Chinese culture. And a culture is really, it describes a people, and it's made up of the way that they speak, the language and the euphemisms and axioms that they use. It's described by the way they dress. Culture refers to the traditions and the rituals that a group of people share. And it includes things like their celebrations. And it's the things that a group of people together share in common. And that kind of defines and forms a culture. And we usually think of this on a national scale, but really that can come down to very, very small groups. Even here at Fields Karate, we have our own Fields Karate culture that's unique to Fields Karate. That's not the same. And it's made up of the way that we talk. It's made up of the axioms that we use and the examples. It's made up of the traditions that we have, the celebrations that we honor and enjoy together. All those sorts of things make up our karate culture. Now, one of the things that you always run into when you start talking about culture, whether it's a microculture in one little organization or a national culture, one of the big things you notice right away is the way that culture dresses. Now, for us, in karate culture and at Fields Karate, we wear typically a karate gi, or a karate uniform. And there's always questions about that. And one of the first questions I get about karate culture and our gi is, why? Why in the world do we need to practice karate in a karate gi? Especially if we're an American school, or if you're a European school, why would we use an Asian, especially a Japanese style dress to practice our karate? Well, there are a couple of good reasons for it. One of the biggest reasons is purely practical. Karate gis were designed by the people who developed karate, specifically Sensei Gishin Funakoshi. It was designed to help train karate. So it's made of a very sturdy fabric and gives us a uniform that we can grab and pull and tug and work out in, that still allows us to freely move but isn't easily damaged and torn. So that's a huge part of it. Now, the first question after I explain something like that is, well, since I said if it's just a matter of being practical, couldn't we use like sweatpants and a t-shirt? I mean, those are free moving kinds of clothing, and you're absolutely right. If you wanted to practice karate in sweatpants and a t-shirt, that would be perfectly okay. I would still argue that the karate gi is typically a little bit tougher, so it's going to hold up better under your training, but there's nothing wrong with practicing karate in sweatpants and a t-shirt. I've done it myself. That's okay. But for some of those practical purposes, especially having the belt when we start doing throws and takedowns, we have something hard that we can grab onto, that would, in a practical self-defense situation, we would just grab someone's belt or their pants. But we need to be able to do that over and over and over and over again without tearing our pants or tearing our belts up. So that's where karate uniforms, a gi and a belt or an obi, comes in very handy. Now, one of the other pretty good reasons for wearing a karate gi, especially in a karate school outside of Japan, would be to enjoy and honor the tradition of where our karate comes from. We study a style that comes from Japan and Okinawa, where they typically wear karate gi. And that's a fine reason to do it, because that is part of our culture here at Fields Karate. We incorporate some of that Japanese culture into our culture, and we honor that. It's simply a matter of respect, and respecting specifically where we come from, and the men and women who've come and trained before us and passed this down to us. So in a way, wearing the same kind of karate uniform is a nod of respect to those folks. Now, from a historical standpoint, since we're talking about where karate comes from, karate came from Okinawa to Japan, and it was a man named Sensei Gishin Funakoshi, Master Funakoshi, who took it to mainland Japan. And one of the things that he wanted to do, one of his goals, was to make karate acceptable to the Japanese people. And the Japanese had formed an organization to kind of oversee that across the many different types of martial arts. And they had a couple of very specific requirements for a martial art to be recognized as an official Japanese martial art under this organization. And so Funakoshi set about doing those things, and one of them was the development of a particular uniform, or a gi. Now, the way Funakoshi started that was he looked to a man, one of his contemporaries, this gentleman a little bit older, his name was Master Jigoro Kano. He was the founder of Judo. Now, at the time, Judo was already a very, very well-respected, well-honored martial art in Japan, and served as kind of a template for new martial arts that this Japanese organization was looking at to recognize and kind of regulate in some ways. So Funakoshi went to Jigoro Kano and watched what his students wore, and Master Kano had developed a judo gi and a belt system. Now, it was not quite as developed as what we have today, and that was fine then. It met the requirements that Funakoshi was looking for. But Funakoshi took that idea of a judo gi and used lighter fabrics and redesigned it a little bit to suit a karate practitioner versus a judo practitioner. And what he came up with was the karate gi and a belt system, much like what we've discussed in previous videos. And that was the start of the karate gi. So that's kind of the history of it. Now, looking at the way Jigoro Kano developed it, one of the big reasons Master Kano developed the judo gi, which is where our karate gi comes from, was because at the time in Japan there was still a very strong caste system. People were divided into different classes, socioeconomic classes, and one of Master Kano's priorities, one of the things that he wanted to do very desperately, was to level the playing field when it came to practicing judo. He had a lot of students in the upper classes that expected more and better training than students from the lower social classes. And Sensei Kano said, that's not going to happen. That's not how we're going to run this. Everyone is going to be on the same level, same playing field, as far as the kind and quality of training they were going to receive from him. So what he did was put everyone in the same judo gi, the same uniform. And he used a plain white, really an off-white canvas uniform, which is what our karate gis began as. And so everybody looked the same. You couldn't look at someone's clothing in a judo dojo and go, well, that person's from a higher socioeconomic status than that person, so I'm going to respect that person more than that person. Not in Master Kano's dojo. Everyone socially was on the same level, and you could not tell who was who socioeconomically from the way they dressed in their judo uniforms. And Funakoshi wanted to play off of that. He wanted to carry that down. And so that was one of the other very practical reasons that the karate gi came into being from before it was a karate gi, was to level the playing field when it came to martial arts practice. And Funakoshi shared a similar sentiment, and so he was very much okay putting everyone in the same karate uniform. Now, if you look at other organizations, you look at the military, you look at other karate martial arts schools, you look at even especially private schools, or in some countries, public schools, and everyone wears a uniform. It's for the same reason, to start breaking down some of those social barriers that really shouldn't be there, because it's just because of who you were born to doesn't make you better than someone else or worse than someone else. And so these uniforms help level the playing field from a social perspective. And that was the goal of Master Kano, that was the goal of Funakoshi, and it's a good thing that we've carried on today, and it still serves that purpose in modern dojos now. So that's a little bit of the history of it. Now, when you start talking about karate uniforms and you start looking at a lot of different schools, you'll realize that a lot of schools, especially in the United States, wear a lot of different types or colors of karate gi. Most karate schools, especially Japanese schools and a lot of Okinawan schools, still wear a white or an off-white karate gi. And that's considered kind of the traditional gi. And the reason the karate gis and the judo gis started out as a plain white gi is that's the material that was cheap and available at the time. It was fairly easy to get a hold of white canvas to make these uniforms out of. Now today, we don't have that restriction. We can get uniforms of many, many different colors at a relatively low cost. So that works out well. But it was purely a practical thing as to why the gi was white. Now, if you're watching this video, you notice I'm not wearing a white gi. I wear a black one. And the biggest reason that at Fields Karate we wear black gis instead of white gis is because my instructor had us wear black gis instead of white gis. And that's really the bulk of the reason. And that's good enough. It's a matter of tradition within our own dojo. Now, in a lot of schools, you start getting, it becomes very easy if the instructor's motivations are not honorable to start getting into a lot of fancy colors and color schemes and combinations of colors and patches and all this other stuff. You can get very, very flamboyant with your karate uniforms. And that was one of the things that Master Kano and Master Funakoshi also wanted to avoid. I don't think that they would have minded a black gi so much, but when you start getting into multicolored gis, they're going to look at you and go, well, you've got an ego. And ego does not have a place in karate. And so Master Funakoshi probably would not have allowed that. You see a lot of schools with a lot of different patches. You see that I wear one patch. And anymore, that's all I wear, and only on one of my uniforms. I otherwise don't push patches. Some schools put on a lot of patches for every different little achievement, and it becomes very, very flashy and showy, and it feeds an ego. Plain gis will help you avoid the ego issues. Ego does not belong in a karate school. Ego does not belong in your karate training. If you get to a point where you're egotistical, where you think of yourself as much better than others simply because you have more patches and you have a brighter colored gi, you're not really training karate anymore. You've missed the point. Because remember, one of the big points behind karate is personal development. Well, if you've got a big ego, there's not much room left for personal development. So you miss the point. So generally at Fields Karate, and in most traditional schools, we go with a plain gi, plain white, plain black. In some schools it might be plain blue. But when you start getting to much, much brighter colors or a plethora of colors or a plethora of patches, well, now you start running into ego issues. And that's a whole different issue by itself, but it is something that we want to avoid at the outset in the way that we dress in our own dojo cultures. So that's a little bit of the history and an explanation behind the karate gi inside the context of the karate culture, and why at Fields Karate in our culture we wear a black gi. Would it be wrong for someone at Fields Karate to wear a white gi? No, not at all. In fact, it's something that's crossed my mind to do on occasion myself, and that would be fine. It's interesting to see some of the reactions, though, when we interact with other karate schools. We walk in with black gis, and sometimes we're the only students with black uniforms when everyone else is in white. It's because our microculture right here is a little bit different. So if you find yourself in that spot where you wear a slightly different type of gi. Maybe you have a bunch of patches, or maybe you typically wear a black gi or a blue gi, and you go to a seminar or a demonstration somewhere, you might consider honoring the culture of the people you're going to and wearing a gi similar to theirs, or perhaps just a plain white one, simply because it's the most widely accepted and most widely respected color. Just as a matter of courtesy to them. That's a lesson that, as an instructor, I learned the hard way a little bit. Not that it was a painful lesson, but it was a notable one. So anyway, there's a little bit of a background and history behind the karate gi inside of a karate culture, and a black karate gi inside of a Fields karate culture. Now, if you're in your dojo, that's a little bit different, that's okay. But remember the point that Master Funakoshi and Master Kano was trying to convey in their plain gis. Be careful of your ego. Flashy gis simply make it a little bit easier to develop an ego that really has no place. So, mind your training, mind your ego, and thank you for watching. Much appreciated.